Good morning, everyone. I know you can hear us, but we can't hear you. We still have a number of people we're expecting to join us, so we're going to wait for just a couple more minutes, and then we will get started probably around 10:05, and we promise to get you out of here on time or a little bit early as well. So we're going to disappear for a couple minutes, and then we will be back, welcome you, and get started. So we'll see you all soon. Okay, I think let's go ahead and get started. So a formal good morning to everyone. Thank you all very much for joining us today for our first 2021 webinar, Is My Data Secure? It's very nice to meet you all. For those who I have not met before, my name is Ann Kidd. I'm the Director of Marketing for Maury & Schoenfeld. We also have two additional speakers joining us today, Jeremy Baumrock, the Director of Professional Services for Examine, and Josh Nesser, a partner at Lavelle Law. So I want to just talk to you a little bit about what our plan is going to be today, introduce our guest speakers, and then we will get into the meat of it. A couple of ground rules to start. As we go through, because of this platform, you're all naturally on mute, so no need to worry about that. We, the presenters, will just have to worry about ourselves. If you have any questions as we go through, you are welcome to chat them either in the public chat or privately to us. That is on the right-hand side of your screen. And then we will hold all questions until the end, and we'll take about 10 or 15 minutes at the end of our presentation to go through some of those open questions you may have. You're also, of course, all welcome to reach back out to any of us after the webinar is over. I know for myself, certainly, usually about 10 minutes after things end, I think of the question that I really wish I had asked. And so we are certainly all available and accessible to you at any time. So with that, let's get started. So earlier in 2020, Maury & Schoenfeld and Examine merged. And one of our the first order of business was for us to really talk to our clients. And one of the things that we originally did when we spoke to business leaders is we found out that really everybody has the same concerns when it comes to IT. And whether they have an in-house IT team that they feel very comfortable with, an external IT partner, business leaders all express the same concern, which is, what is it that I don't know that I don't know? And we heard this sentiment, am I going to walk in tomorrow morning and find there's an IT problem I didn't see coming? And so we dug a little deeper and we found out that there are really four key technology concerns that business leaders have consistently across industry, across company size. And those are data security, ransomware or data breach, securing their newly remote workforce, and strategic IT planning and budgeting. And so, what we have set out to do collectively this year between Marion Schoenfeld, Examine, and some of our additional strategic partners is to come up with a series of webinars where we address these four concerns. And so, here you are. Welcome. Today is our first webinar, and we are going to be talking about data security. Our first speaker today is Jeremy Baumrock. We briefly introduced him at the beginning. Jeremy has worked with Examine for 13 years in a number of roles. He is a technical individual, but is currently part of the leadership team as the Director of Professional Services. As a completely remote company, Examine has employees both here in the Midwest, where they are headquartered, but also around the country. And so Jeremy is lucky enough to enjoy the weather out in Scottsdale, Arizona. He tells me it's 80 and sunny today. It is not 80 and sunny here today. Jeremy holds multiple technical certifications, and he's really focused on helping organizations develop their cybersecurity and technology strategies that are right for them and meet the needs of their organization. And so with that, we will wave hello to Jeremy. Hello, Jeremy.
Hi, Ann. Hi, everyone.
And I'll let him take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Ann, for the introduction. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today, and let's dive into it. All right, so let's talk data security. As Ann just introduced, she went over the top technology concerns that we heard through our business leaders through survey data. I'm going to talk to you about what makes a strong data protection strategy and creating your data security risk profile. Then you'll meet Josh from Lavelle Law, and he'll talk a little bit more about safeguarding business and client information from a policy perspective. And then we'll wrap up with any questions. So what makes a strong data protection strategy? A strong data protection process should be the foundation of all business and technology strategies. When you're advocating privacy and security throughout the planning and implementation process, that will always focus and enforce a focus on protecting the organization's data. Of course, having strong technology oversight by your IT solutions provider or your internal IT team is important to secure your business's network from the perimeter down to the end user workstation. And finally, identifying your organization's current risk profile when it comes to data security will help establish a baseline and ensure future decisions positively impact the desired risk outcome. All organizations will have a different tolerance for risk, of course, but the information we share today are recommendations that any business can consider implementing. So, determining data risk. As a business leader, the first step in determining your organization's current security risk profile is to answer some basic questions. Where is my data stored? Who has access to my data? How is my data accessed? How is my data shared with the outside resources? And is my data being backed up? If you can't answer these questions, it's critical the organization knows this information, and the business owner needs to have confidence in those answers. So let's dive into each one of these questions in a little more detail and discuss some high-level technology strategies that everyone can and should implement. Where is my data stored? So this question used to have a pretty simple answer, and it was typically on a server, on my workstation, in my office building, somewhere, but I know it's in my four walls. Of course, today, with the explosion of software as a service or SaaS options and different cloud platforms, understanding where your data is stored has become much more challenging. As companies evolve and grow, of course, it's natural for new data sources to multiply. However, centralizing data across your business can assure each team references a common source of information, increase productivity, optimize collaboration, and provide an easier approach to security and access management. While it would be best to centralize your data to one location, the reality is you're likely utilizing one or more cloud platforms already today. This is common in today's technology landscape, but in order to limit data sprawl and create uniform policies for secure data access, choosing your core applications and where they'll be hosted is a good first step. Some of the most common cloud applications are hosted email through Microsoft 365 and QuickBooks Online for accounting and finance functions, just to name a few. There are some specific cloud data platforms that many organizations take advantage of. Of course, there's others, CRM databases, Salesforce, HubSpot, but what about the rest of your company data? Most organizations have spreadsheets and Word documents, pictures, CAD drawings, blueprints, proprietary information, and customer data that needs to be protected. This data typically can and should be centralized to one location. Another important step for understanding where your data is stored is to limit data silos. Data silos are repositories of data specific to one department and isolated from the rest of the organization. Centralizing all departmental data to one location allows for a common data set and the ability for coworkers to easily collaborate without worrying about referencing different data points. When moving this data to one location, you can still limit and secure access to sensitive data, which we'll dive into a little bit more shortly. Understanding where your data is stored will also improve data governance. Data governance strategies center around the idea of setting a standard for creating and evaluating the use of data within an organization. This might be more simplistic in smaller businesses, but can range to very strict guidelines if your company is held to some sort of regulatory standard. When data is centralized and data silos are removed, data governance capabilities improve. It allows your IT provider or internal IT staff easier ways to monitor and control data access and minimize the risks involved with mishandling sensitive information. So once your business has determined where your data is being stored, the next logical question is who has access to that data? Before determining who has access, it's important to classify company data as sensitive and non-sensitive. This will provide a framework for building your internal file and folder structure and will highlight data that should be locked down to specific departments. Implementing the least privilege access method is important to ensure users only see the data they're supposed to see and required for their job function. This limits the attack surface and protects the business because if a standard user account is compromised, they'll have limited ability to traverse and access files within your organization. To implement least privilege access, role-based or group permissions should be used to grant access instead of individual user accounts. This is not only easier for the IT staff to manage and delegate access, but allows for a simpler path to compliance if your organization is held to regulatory standards. Some common compliance standards that require the use of least privilege and role-based permissions are HIPAA privacy rules and PCI compliance. It's also important to enable audit logging for all data repositories within the organization, so in the event there is a breach or compromise, logs can be reviewed to determine which account or accounts were used. Logging shouldn't just be used as a way to track down potential issues, however, but also to verify users are only accessing the data they should be. A privilege audit or review of these logs should be completed at minimally annually or on some sort of scheduled basis deemed acceptable for your organization. And limiting administrative access to all your resources in your technical environment is important, of course, and this concept should be applied to data access as well. Some applications and resources still require users to have local admin access, relatively legacy, and hopefully you don't have to do that in today's world, but it's a reality with some applications. But end users should never have separate administrator accounts from any standard account. End users should never have administrative access to shared data or network resources. So things like, of course, your data repository you're creating, end users should never be able to just log in and see every single file or have access to any sort of administrative server in your environment. IT vendors or staff should always have separate administrator accounts from their standard user accounts, so administrative changes can be easily logged, tracked, and audited. So the third question, how is my data accessed? When talking about how your data is accessed, we really focus on two areas: what systems are allowed to access company data, and how do those systems connect to the data. When we look at what systems can access your company data, it starts with a strong policy. Oftentimes, this is a sign-off within the employee handbook stating that the employee will only access company resources from a company-issued machine. When logging into your organization's network, it's also important to display the network usage policy within a Windows domain. That can be the screen that pops up after you hit Control-Delete, you hit OK. Many users don't even realize what it is, but it really is a way to display your company network usage policy, and it forces your users to accept that policy every time they log onto a company machine. These policies will need to clearly state what the business's stance is on computer access. To enforce company policies for PCs, such as disk encryption, remote management, antivirus, anti-malware, and more, the use of company-owned devices should be the standard. When you allow your users to connect from BYOD or home machines, it limits the IT vendor or staff's ability to enforce security measures and monitor system access. It also becomes difficult to monitor and track users attempting to download company data to their home machines, which are often shared with other family members. Now, of course, with the explosion of remote work over the past 12 months, there were associated hardware shortages, difficulty sourcing laptops, and really any hardware and technology was kind of hard to find. And that may have forced your business to bend some of your policies and allow the use of non-company owned machines. Again, was very common. Many people had to do that. But now that hardware vendors are starting to catch up on production, it should be a priority to get remaining remote users off of any home machines and onto some sort of company provided or owned device. Many business owners feel good about their data being secure when users are working from the office, and this is because there's often a layered security approach. It starts with the internet perimeter, firewalls, switches, access control rules, all the way down to the end user workstation. But because so many users are now working outside of the organization's brick and mortar office, those same good feelings aren't as prevalent. So providing a secure way to access company data remotely is now a necessity and will help ease that feeling. Virtual private networks, or VPNs, are one of the most common. Most people have heard of VPN before. Most people have probably used a VPN before. They're one of the easier remote access methods to implement to provide a secure way to access company data. When configured and secured properly, an organization can limit the ability of what resources and data users can access from the outside. Some basic recommendations to deploy a secure VPN are configuring multi-factor authentication on any one of those connections, enabling single sign-on, which would tie your user accounts to your Windows environment so your users only have to remember their corporate username and password to access data remotely. This will also enforce your company password policies and sign-on policies to those remote connections. Limit what services and data resources are available to your remote users, and limit the ability to download files to local systems whenever possible. Of course, there are other ways to connect to your systems remotely. Another popular method being virtual desktop infrastructures, which we didn't touch on much so far today, and we won't. But it is a great way to provide flexibility on companies' resources, both internally and externally. And if you're interested in finding out any more about any other methods, of course, as Anne mentioned earlier, we're always available to field these questions after the webinar. All right, so the fourth question, how is my data shared with the outside? So far we've discussed where to store company data, determining who has access to that data, and how that data is accessed by your organization's employees. But what about when your users need to share your data with your clients or other outside resources? It's important to distinguish what methods are provided to your staff for sending data securely and enforce those methods through policy and training. One of the most common methods for sharing data securely is through email encryption. This can be provided in a multitude of different ways, depending on what solution is in place for your email. Some common methods are an Outlook plugin or button. This usually requires a small install on your end user's machine. It'll pop up another button when they go to open an email, and they can hit send secure, which will encrypt that message and any attachments. If your organization is using Microsoft 365, which many are for hosted email, you get the ability to configure a secure keyword in which your end user would type in secure in the subject line, and it would automatically encrypt that message. And as well, there are also other third-party providers that can do very similar things. You can also enable encryption at the organizational level, so all your messages will all be automatically encrypted as you leave your email environment. Another common method for sharing data with the outside is through a secure file transfer solution. A popular cloud platform for this service is Citrix ShareFile, which provides cloud data repository for sensitive information shared through a secure link to external contacts. When your external contacts access this data, they're required to enter information before they view, which allows your end users to track who and when that data was accessed. There are, of course, many other solutions to share data. We won't have time to go through all of those today. These are just some really common ones that we've seen throughout the environment, throughout our experiences, and some of the ones that we actually use internally as well and support because we've kind of vetted them as secure solutions. Finally, how is my data backed up? Now that we've talked through some of the important criteria for securing your company's data, One step that is often disregarded is the importance of having a strong backup and recovery strategy. After going through the development of a data protection policy, the last thing any business owner wants to deal with is data loss or downtime. So having a good backup and recovery strategy will ensure a business can quickly recover from data loss, ranging from an end user deleting a file or a spreadsheet to a ransomware attack, which could encrypt or lock a bunch of different files on your network. Implementing an image-based backup solution will provide flexible restore options to restore individual files or an entire system. Saving these images locally in the facility where your servers and data reside will provide your IT vendor or staff the ability to quickly recover the loss of a deleted file. But it's also important to note that while the data will reside in the same location, backup images should be saved on a dedicated server or repository separate from where your production data is saved. This provides the ability to isolate that backup traffic and data so that if your organization was breached by ransomware, the backup data will not be affected. All backup data should also be encrypted with the highest encryption protocol allowed and protected with strong passwords. To protect the backup data further, there should be multiple copies saved throughout the environment. And depending on how many physical locations your business has, you might be able to replicate these images from one building to another. But because of the low cost of cloud storage these days, many organizations take advantage of a cloud solution to replicate backup images because they also provide a recovery environment. These environments provide remote connections. So in the event your main operations center was unavailable for an extended period of time, users could VPN to your cloud and access company resources. Of course, it's important to ensure backup data is encrypted both at rest and in flight, which means that replication connection to the cloud must be secure. Through local and replicated copies of backup images, multiple copies of your backup data will be created and stored securely for multiple restore options. This can be considered having a multi-layered approach, and for many SMBs, this will provide a strong backup and recovery strategy. However, the larger your technology footprint and greater amount of company data you have, a consideration for adding a second backup software and image type should be discussed and implemented. The less an organization has to put all their eggs in one basket when it comes to recovery options, the better opportunity for a quick and efficient resumption of productivity for your business. And finally, some additional data protection tips. I've touched on a few of these through our previous discussion, but really they're important to mention again because once you set the foundation for a strong data security program, you want to make sure your IT vendor and staff are doing everything to limit exposure and ensure your users understand how they can help. So again, protecting any connection with multi-factor authentication is critical in today's technology landscape. Almost all organizations use Microsoft 365. It's literally a checkbox to enable for most users in that system and will protect your end users really, really well as far from password breaches and things. So that's extremely important and relatively easy to implement. And of course, any remote or VPN connection should also have some sort of multi-factor authentication enabled on it. Using strong password policies, both internally on your network and in your cloud platforms, and then using single sign-on, whenever possible, again, extending your corporate account to those cloud apps. When you do have end users that need to remember a lot of different passwords, providing some sort of approved password manager that your organization and your IT team has approved of will help provide a secure repository for storing those passwords. Windows operating system and third-party patch updates are critical to close vulnerabilities and security risks on end-user systems. Antivirus and anti-malware solutions should be installed, of course, on all workstations and servers with frequent signature updates. Any desktop and mobile machines should have their hard drives encrypted to protect any data that happens to be saved locally. And finally, training employees not only on company network and data sharing policies, but annual security awareness training will help educate them on email spoofing and other common phishing techniques which bad actors have used to gain passwords into businesses' networks. All right, everyone. Well, I appreciate you listening to me. I'm going to turn it back over to Anne, who's going to introduce our next speaker.
All right. So let's take a moment. We're going to switch gears a little bit. I want to introduce Josh Nesser. Josh is a partner with Lavelle Law. Lavelle Law is a Chicago-based firm providing comprehensive and affordable legal services, both for businesses and individuals. They have a specific practice area focused on cybersecurity and data privacy. And Josh will be providing us with some additional information on risk management and talking to us a little bit about crafting your privacy statements to help protect your business. Josh, as it says here right in front of you, is a partner at Lavelle Law in the areas of tax, M&A, banking, securities, cybersecurity, and data privacy, among many of the other areas. He participates in Chicago's Legal Latte podcast, and he is the author of IRS Practice and Procedure article, which was published in the Northwest Suburban Bar Association's monthly news briefs. We are so very pleased that Josh was able to join us to add a little bit more to this topic today. And with that, we will pass it over to Josh.
I appreciate that, Ann. Thanks for all that good information, Jeremy. And just to echo what they both said, thanks everyone for joining us. And do feel free to shoot any questions you have over. We'll do our best to answer them, whether that's after the presentation or offline. Either way works. But today I'm going to be talking about every attorney's favorite subject, mitigating risk. And of course, we're going to talk about that in the context of data privacy and cybersecurity. Just a bit of a roadmap about the subjects I'm going to cover. We're going to talk about the cybercrime economy, which is probably a term you hadn't heard about a few years ago, but now it's something real we have to deal with. Small businesses or businesses' points of vulnerability to cybercrime, understanding who is at risk for that type of crime. And then we're going to talk about what a business continuity plan is and how to put one in place, and the specific protocols and procedures you should or you might want to put in place for your business and employees to mitigate your risk, which is what we need to do. So this cybercrime economy, just a crazy stat that you see there. As of this year, cybercrime is estimated to cost the world $6 trillion per year, which is obviously just an astronomical amount of money. But this is something happening constantly to businesses of all sizes, and something you have to be prepared to deal with when you're running a business. It affects really all businesses and individuals. When you watch the news, when you get your information, you're going to see all these stories about major corporations, data breaches and class actions and this and that. But this is not a problem isolated to large businesses. Small businesses are dealing with this stuff every day, and oftentimes are more vulnerable because they don't have the type of infrastructure in place they need to protect themselves against these attacks. As you can see there, the average cost of a data breach in 2020 was just about $4 million. Think about how devastating that could be to a business, and that's just the average. So there's breaches that cost less than that, but there's certainly breaches that cost much more than that. And then the last note there, it's estimated there are nearly 1 million attempted cyber attacks each day, which again seems unbelievable when you think about the amount of phishing emails you receive each day, the amount of text messages you receive trying to get information out of you. The volume of these is just huge. And sometimes I know we see those emails, we see those text messages and say, who would ever respond to this? Who's falling for this? But when they're trying it a million times a day, you only need a small percentage of those attempts to be successful to do a lot of damage. So something we all have to be on the lookout for. So when you're dealing with any kind of risk, and especially this risk, the first step is figuring out, where is my business vulnerable? What are my points of vulnerability? As you see here, 70% of all attacks attempt some kind of lateral movement. What that means is when one area of your network is attacked, it's normally not isolated to that area. That could lead to an attack in another area or multiple areas, just trying to overwhelm your system and catch you off guard. 31% of attack victims suffer a destructive attack, where the hacker is trying to just take down your entire infrastructure, disable your website, disable your server, make it so you can no longer function. In a survey, 32% of businesses suffered an attack that began with their supply chain partner, meaning it wasn't their system that was attacked directly, but they were harmed by an attack on a vendor, a client, something like that. So you may think that your system is completely protected, but you may be vulnerable from your partner's vulnerabilities. So it's important to try to mitigate that risk by auditing who you're working with, making sure they have the necessary protections in place, putting in place strong contract safeguards to protect you or indemnify you against any loss you experience because of your partner's vulnerabilities and attacks on their systems. All those are things that business owners might not think about, but it's obviously important to think about. It says phishing attacks constitute more than 87% of high-risk email threats. And I think we see those constantly, and they're getting more and more sophisticated. You see these emails, and it's a lot of times tough to distinguish between a legitimate email and an illegitimate one, which is all the reason we have to be more careful. So evaluating, is your business at risk? And I think you can see there, more or less the answer is going to be yes. But some things to think about to figure out whether your business is at risk. Some of the higher risk factors. Do you have employees working remotely? I think in this day and age, after last year, most businesses do. And that seems to be a trend that businesses are moving to have more and more employees work remotely. There's certainly some benefits from doing that. But as more employees leave the office and work remotely, businesses become more vulnerable to attack. Who in your business has access to sensitive information? Certainly, the more people who have access to sensitive information, the more points of vulnerability you have, the more safeguards you have to put in place to make sure that sensitive information is protected. Do you have employee policies? This is a major mistake I see businesses make, especially small businesses, not putting in place employee handbooks. Or if you do have an employee handbook, not putting in place data policies. Like Jeremy talked about, you need to have those policies in place so employees know what the rules are, what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do when sharing information, when sending communications, things like that. And just having these policies in place is not enough. You got to revisit them. This landscape is changing constantly, as everybody can see. So having a policy in place, a data privacy or a cybersecurity policy you put in place 5 years ago, by now that may be obsolete. So these things have to be reviewed and updated every so often. Do you have an incident response plan? If something goes wrong, if there is some sort of attack, is there a plan in place to address that? And has that plan been communicated to the necessary employees? If not, that's something you need to address. And do you have a business continuity plan, something to keep the business operating following some sort of incident, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes. So 2020, of course, was a different year, to say the least. I think it was a teaching moment in a lot of different ways for businesses. But looking at some of the lessons that we learned from 2020, especially in this area, training needs of extended remote workforce for appropriate use of VPNs, virtual software, phones, etc. I think a lot of businesses realized that their employees did not know what they should and should be doing while working remotely. And unfortunately, I think that costs a lot of businesses a lot. So it's something that businesses need to get better at. There need to be protocols and practices in place for employees. That is critical. Some of the policies we talked about just a few minutes ago, if those are not in place, that's just another vulnerability, and it's just another way that businesses are leaving themselves open to these types of incidents. Communication is paramount. You want to have consistent communication, fairly simple and understandable communication, timely communication, coming from the right people. Without that communication, you can have the best policy in the world, but if it's not sufficiently communicated to your employees and they don't understand policies, it doesn't do you a whole lot of good. You need to create a culture of mobility and remote expectations. Again, businesses are moving to remote, and employees are, in a lot of instances, going to want to have the ability to work remote, but they need to know what is expected of them when they're doing that. And the company's existing pandemic plan and business continuity plan efforts were not designed to handle COVID-19. I think we learned that last year, and that's understandable. It's something that we haven't seen in a very long time, or maybe ever. But a lot of businesses were not prepared for it, and that's just a reminder. You need to be prepared for the unexpected. Talking about these business continuity plans, If you currently have a traditional business continuity plan, it probably looks like what's outlined on this slide. It considers an impact to one office or a geographic location. That impact could be caused by an epidemic, pandemic, natural disaster, a power outage, a cyber attack, other things that we have grown accustomed to, unfortunately. And it looks to resolve and maintain operations, maintain operational efficiencies, your backup site and your connections, pain, possibly whatever the cyber criminal is looking to get out of the attack, and then putting in place emergency relief. Now with COVID, that probably changed what business continuity plans look like a bit, or taught employers and businesses that they need to revisit those continuity plans to address maybe the next unexpected issue that arises and throws a major curveball. All business processes must be assessed. You need to look at your business from the top down and evaluate if something happens unexpected and we have to shift, which of our processes are not designed to do that. And then you have to evaluate that. Mission critical functions within each business process must be identified. What things do we have to make sure will remain in place during the next incident? If there is some sort of cyber attack, if we are hacked, what do we need to make sure stays functional? Potential threats and impacts should be assessed for each business process. You can't just look at your business as a whole and say, what are our threats? You need to look at each process you have, each department, each function, and say, what are the potential threats there and what are the impacts of those threats? Supporting technology systems must be mapped to business processes and mission critical functions. Viable business process risk scenarios should be considered. So play out these scenarios and try to imagine what would happen if something unexpected happened. If there was some sort of attack on a process, how would your business handle that? What steps would you take to defend yourselves against that and get through it? And maybe go through training exercises with your employees so they're ready for it and they're not too caught off guard, as I think we were all caught off guard by COVID, and as businesses are often caught off guard by these types of attacks. Estimate the dollar loss for each viable business process risk scenario to help determine the financial impact. You need to know not only where you're vulnerable, but what is your total exposure. If something goes wrong, what's the economic impact going to be to your business, and what are you going to need to do to survive that and continue operating? These are all important things that businesses now should be evaluating within their continuity plans, if they already have ones in place, or they should be addressing in new continuity plans. So that kind of wraps up my side of things, but of course, reach out with any concerns you have on this issue. There's certainly much to talk about and many questions, I think, in a lot of people's minds. It's a constantly evolving area, so we welcome any questions and we'd love to help you out. There's our contact information on the slide. I appreciate your time.
Hello again, everyone. Thank you so much, Josh. That was fantastic. Okay, so we have come to the point in the presentation where we get to provide you with the information that you would like to know or to answer any of your questions. You can, again, feel free to type those either in the public or private chat. We had a couple questions come through, so we will start with those. And anybody who has additional questions, please go ahead and type those, and then I will proctor them. So the first question we got was from Mark, and Mark wants to know very broadly, where do I start with data security? That's a big question. So Jeremy, I'm going to throw that one to you.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Mark. That's a good question. Well, really, it kind of highlights a lot of the things we were talking about here today, but really to support both your internal IT team, a good first step is to really go outside, hire a non-biased third party like Examine, to help you with evaluate your current strategy and put a plan in place. People often think that this process can be lengthy and time consuming, but we have a non-intrusive method to kind of do that remotely and quickly to expedite the experience. But really, it's going to be, looking from the outside in and making sure you get a non-biased review.
Excellent. Okay, let's skip over. We just got a new one that came in from James. James wants to know, how does a VPN protect my data? Jeremy, I'll give you that one again.
Yeah. Sounds good. From a very high level, what that does is when a user is outside of your four walls, so he's at Starbucks, they're at home, and they're connecting to your company data. When that VPN is established, it's creating a secure tunnel from your that user's workstation to your company data. So obviously they're going to be viewing file structures or looking at spreadsheets and things like that. That ensures that some outside bad actor can't hack into that connection and try to pull the data that your users are looking at. So it's really securing the internet at a high level from point A to point B to make sure that any of that data that's being viewed by your end users is secured. Hopefully that helps. I mean, it could go much more detailed than that. And of course, we'd love to talk more about it, but at a very high level, it's really just securing the internet connection between your end user and your data.
I think that's great. Okay, I'm going to bounce to another one that we got privately. It's from Sharon. And Sharon wants to know, what is the most common mistake you see businesses make in putting together website terms and conditions or privacy policies? So this one to Josh.
Yeah, very good question. I would say the most common mistake I see, and I especially see it with smaller businesses that may not have the legal budget or the cybersecurity budget that larger businesses have, is thinking that those types of documents are one size fits all, and that you can just go on the internet, find a template, throw your business's name in there, and put it on your website, and you're good to go. There's hundreds of templates you can find online, but they're by no means one size fits all. They have to be customized to fit your business needs, your business policies, your business processes. And by just taking another business's document and throwing it on your website, or pulling a template off the internet and filling in some blanks, you're really doing yourself a disservice, and you're going to end up costing yourself more in the long run than it would cost to get a good, solid document put in place. So I think that's the mistake I see most often, and one that we would love to fix.
Okay, we had a question come in from Mike. Mike would like to know, is my data in the cloud? My data is in the cloud. Is it secure?
That's a great question as well. A lot of different methods to try to understand. Again, I think the biggest or easiest way, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but trying to do an assessment to understand everything that's put in place today. We got to get a baseline to know what security protocols and restrictions are there. Where is your data stored? Really highlighting, going through the 5 questions we talked about, and analyze your cloud platforms. Really one quick technical recommendation. Again, I kind of hammered on this a lot. Multi-factor authentication. It is really one of the more quick and easy ways to implement a technical solution to help protect your end users. So certainly most cloud option platforms offer MFA or multi-factor today, and that'll be the quick and easiest way technically. But again, assessing things and getting a strategic plan to review everything would probably be best in the long run.
Do we have any other questions? Going once, going twice. Okay. And with that, we will wrap up. Just a friendly reminder that Maury & Schoenfeld is an accounting IT services and consulting firm here in the Chicago area. We are partners with Examine. You've met Jeremy, myself today, and then also Josh from Lavelle Law, who does specialize in cybersecurity and privacy policies. For each of you who have been in attendance today, you will receive a copy of this webinar. Please feel free to share it with other members in your teams, in your organizations, in your networks, or anyone you know. We hope you can join us for our future webinars coming up here throughout the course of this year, where we will dig into some of those other pain points. And we really hope to hear from all of you soon. Thank you again for your time, and we hope you have a great day. Thanks so much.